Hi, I'm Andrew with Snyder Consulting, and this is a review of the Sonos app on Android. If you're interested in hiring us for an in-depth analysis of your app, our contact info is in the video description. Let's get to it. All right, the first thing we're going to take a look at is what happens when we hold this icon. Looks like there are some quick actions that we can select. There's search, my Sonos, and living room. It looks like these would deep link you into the app. So that's a nice option to have. Also, there's some widgets. Let's check it out. They have a home screen widget, so it looks like this is a control for the app. When you place it, you just choose the room that it's going to be in. I only have one room in my system. So let's see, we can resize it. We can make it wider, and it looks like we can make it full screen too. So that's a nice touch. We can control the current song. We can play it and pause it. We can adjust the volume. So I think that's good. You can move it up and down. Now notice if we tap left or right of the dot, it doesn't move this thumb straight to it. That's what would happen a lot with this sort of seek bar. Instead, it just bumps it up and down one increment or decrement. So I think that's a nice decision they made. Also, you can see the icon on the left. It changes based on what the volume is at. You can tap it and it'll mute your system. You can still move this around, but it's overridden. If we tap it again, it enables it. We can move it all the way to 0. So I think that is a nice touch. One thing I want to point out with this widget is that there seems to be a flickering when you change any of the controls on it. You can see it going when I do that. If I click out, you can see it flicker out a few times. Not a big deal. Now let's take a look at the permissions. So if we go to the app info, you can see there are several permissions listed. We'll click into that. And I want to see a more drilled down view of those. So if you tap up here in the three dot menu, you can see all permissions. So we're going to go in there and we can see the breakdown of what each permission is used for. So for location, they have approximate and precise. This is used a lot of the time with network connections like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. The location permission is required for those, so this is standard. Microphone, the recording audio is for the voice controls on the devices. Music and audio, the app is heavily used for streaming music, so you can read music from your device and send it to the speakers. Nearby devices, it uses NFC in the app to connect to the speakers when you're first setting them up. So you just tap your device. I think that's a nice way to do it. Notifications, there's a music control notification similar to what the home screen widget does. Read video files from shared storage, so this is going to let it, you can upload music videos if you wanted to listen to those. And then these other capabilities, it's showing general things like network, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. These are all standard permissions. I don't see anything that would concern me with these. Everything looks good. Now let's get into the app itself. I'm going to open it up here, and you can see briefly there's a splash screen. And it looks like they followed all the best practices for that. It shows their branding when you open it up before the main screen loads. All right, let's look at the navigation. They use the bottom tab navigation here. We can click between them and see what each screen does. Notice how at the top there isn't one standardized toolbar across shared between the screens. Usually you would see an app do that. Here they've customized it so that the top of the screen just has controls for whatever that screen does. Another thing to notice is that the app actually uses just one screen and it switches out the content inside of that. You'll notice that this music pop-up here, it doesn't flicker or go away when we change screens. Most apps when you change the screen you're on, it's going to put the other one in the background and then start a new one. And then so we would see this fade out and back in, but it doesn't do that here. It's an interesting choice for them to just make the entire app in one screen, but I think it works well for what they're doing. There's less loading, everything is a little bit quicker. Another thing to look at is how if we close the app and go back into it, it's going to bring us back to the same place we were before. So here we were on the My Sonos. If we change over to the settings screen and close the app, when we open it back up, we're in the settings again. So it remembers whichever screen you use the most. That means for the users, it's less clicking around to get to where you want to be. Let's take a look at the settings screen. The first thing I'm noticing is they have a nice use of icons. Each of these list items has an icon showing what it represents. I think they did a good job keeping them all the right size, and they're descriptive enough to see at a glance what they do. Now notice on the screen, if we scroll up, you can see this settings title. It fades out and then a smaller one fades in at the top. It is a nice touch, but I noticed it's a little choppy sometimes. You'll see where one fades in, but then it fades out again. I think it's fine, but just something I noticed. Let's take a look at the account. If we come in here, there's some info about your email you're signed in as. You can sign out. It shows a confirmation, which anytime an app, if you do an action that can't easily be reversed, you should always have a confirmation. So I'm glad to see that. If we look at subscriptions, we can click into what's available. They have these cards that you can expand and collapse. There is a UI bug I noticed with this. When it is expanded, if you tap it while it's still collapsing, this little icon underneath goes away. So now if I click another one, it refreshes and you can see that come up again. There's actually two different icons it looks like they're using. They have one that sits right here and one down here. When you expand or collapse it, they get toggled visible or invisible. What's usually standard for a card like this is for that button, it would rotate to show the current state of it, and it would just be stuck at the bottom of the card. So instead of there being two, there would only be one, and when we expand, it would just move down as the card expands. I think that would be a nice way to clean this up, but it's obviously not a big deal here. I do like that you can click them to see more information about what's on the screen. Another thing to look at with these is if you have one card expanded and you tap another one, it will collapse the other cards that are previously expanded. That's a nice touch because it keeps the screen from getting too tall when you have all of them expanded. Usually you only want to look at one at a time, so I think that's a great decision. Going back to the account screen, I think having the change email and reset password buttons, those are great options to have. I think the more account management you can do from the app, the better. Now, if we click into one of these, it looks like they actually take you outside of the app into maybe a shared multi-platform layout, or even using a web browser to display this, because if you take a look, it doesn't follow all of the same styling that the rest of the app used. We were in dark mode, now it's in light mode. The text styles look a little different. These just don't feel like standard Android elements. So I would think that we're actually being taken out of the app. Now you can confirm this with the developer settings. There's a way to look at the layout bounds. So if you enable this, it shows where everything is. If we look back at the Sonos app, you can see all of these UI elements have sort of these boxes around them. Now, when we click on the change email, it loads up this screen, but none of these have a box around them. So these aren't actually being rendered by the Android system. It looks like they're all contained inside of one, like a wrapper or a frame. Another thing you'll notice is the back button, the system back. It doesn't work for this. You have to hit the close button. When it first opens, that loading spinner that shows, it's not the standard Android one. So there's just a few things that look off about it. One thing I'll say, while I have a trained eye for these things, they implemented this well enough that I don't think most people would notice. Some apps do this really poorly, but I think here it's fine. As long as it works, I think the best possible user experience is always going to be keeping people within the app. Doing this is almost always cutting a corner. Now let's take a look at the system. My first impression is that there's a lot of options on this screen, which is really great for when you need to control devices. I think the more options we can have here, the better, as long as they're organized in a way that makes sense and labeled appropriately. So let's click into the products here. I have a living room, a sub, and 2 speakers, and they're all listed here. I think that's good. If I click in, I can see the name, and I can look at these presets. I can select different ones. I'm going to leave it as living room. Looks like I can also do a custom name, but if I clear out the name and go back, it's just going to leave what I had there before. I think that's a smart decision so that you don't end up with a blank name on accident. So they must require it, but there wasn't any sort of validation to save it. I like it when apps do things in the background to save users from making a mistake that they'll be frustrated with. Now, each of these products, they let you click into them and select the connection type. So each of the speakers has an Ethernet port. So if you plug it directly in and hardwire the Ethernet, you can disable the Wi-Fi. But if we try to do it in the app when it's not hardwired, it's actually going to tell us that the Wi-Fi didn't get disabled because we don't have the Ethernet plugged in. So this is another example where they save you from disconnecting your speaker and not being able to use it again. It's the same option with each of these. There's some controls for removing devices or connecting other devices. I think they did a good job here of showing what the icons are doing. Good, simple controls here. Let's look at the sound. For the equalizer, it's got standard controls. You can move the bass and treble up and down. There's loudness. When loudness is enabled, what it does is it balances out the audio. If you have really loud points coming through the speaker, it's going to soften those. And if you have really quiet points, it's going to boost them up so that all of the sound is more normalized. It's on by default. I think it's a good smart feature. I do like that they include a reset button so you can put everything back to a baseline really quickly. One thing I want to point out with the equalizer slide bars is that there's multiple points between each number. So you can see real slightly that the thumb is moving, but the number isn't changing. So there's several points between 3 and 4, which I think is interesting. I don't know why that would be. I don't know if it actually has volume levels between those. Instead they could do like a percentage. I think not a big deal again. You can tap to snap to different areas. You can increment, and when you do this by tapping, it does move them a full step. One thing that I really like about these sliders is that they show you how far you are above or below from 0. I think having it start in the middle and go up and down from there was a really smart decision. Moving on to TruePlay, this is a feature that's unfortunately only available on Apple devices. Apparently it's because they have more standardized microphones. Android, there's so many different hardware configurations, and Sonos uses the microphone to calibrate your system. On the iPhone, what you do is you move your phone around the room while the speakers are playing sound. It says what the loudness should be and just gives you really the best sound. But at least on Android, you do have the control to turn off that tuning and put it back to just its defaults. So you can see, which one you like better. Now, I will note that on iOS, this feature worked really well. It was well designed and it only took a couple minutes and I got it sounding great on my first try. Surround audio, we have the option to turn on and off our surrounds. So this is nice if you just want to quickly turn off the rear speakers. We have the same volume controls for the TV as we did on the EQ. It has that same thing with the points in between the full number steps. Again, it's fine. One thing I want to point out that I like is it has haptic feedback. So every time I change a full number up, the phone vibrates a little bit and I can feel that tactile change. Music playback, there's an option between ambient and full. There's a description here where full is just going to have a louder sound out of all of your surround speakers. Ambient is going to be more subtle. So I'm glad that they have the option there to change it. When we tap on these, we get a system toast saying that the feature isn't available while TruePlay is enabled. I don't like that they use the system toast because, as you'll see, they stack up. So if I were to keep tapping this, when the toast goes away, the ones that are queued up will continue to show. It's really not a great experience because there's nothing the user can do to get rid of them if they tap them too many times. The best practice here is to use, it's called a snack bar, but it's basically a layout that the developers can control and they can dismiss the current ones that are showing. So if you continue tapping it, you can either ignore the subsequent taps or you can dismiss and show a new one. You can make them closable. They're really just better in every way. You can style them to fit your app better. Toasts like this are quick and easy to implement, but they're really not a great user experience. So let's go back and turn off TruePlay so that we can see the controls there for surround audio. Now, when we click in here, there's three options. There's less than 2 feet, 2 to 10 feet, and more than 10 feet. One thing I wish that this screen did was give a better description of where that is measuring from. At first, I didn't know if this was distance from the front speakers, the sound bar, or from our listening position. We can change these. And I do like also that the surround shows the selection that we made. So without having to click into it, I can see that it was set to more than 10 feet. There is also an option here to reset. Now I'm going to look into sub audio. We have all the same standard controls here of disabling the sub. We can increase the level. Then there's also a phase control. This is the same case where I wish that there was a description. I don't know what phase control does. Here we have height audio. When we click into it, it's the same as the phase control where I'm not really sure what this changes, but again, the more controls, the better once I do figure out what they do. There's also a volume limit. This is really great. It sets the maximum volume. I can move it to percentages. Now, one thing I think is strange is the furthest down it goes is 1%. So I can't actually set it to being muted. Every other slider like this lets you go down to 0. So I want to say that this was just a simple oversight. When we come down to home theaters, we have more simple controls, some toggles. We've got dialogue sync. This lets you add an audio delay if your system could benefit from that. You can set a group delay. This is interesting because it shows 4 options. There's low, medium, high, and then max, but max actually jumps by a huge amount. Here we have low at 75. It goes up 38 milliseconds to 113, 37 milliseconds to high, and then 1850 milliseconds it jumps up to max. I'm not sure why there aren't more options in between. It would be nice if there was a slider or just more evenly spaced out options. Continuing down, we have more controls, simple toggles. There's a remote control setup, which brings up this nice little pop-up. You can move it around for some reason. I don't know that that's necessary. But you can set up a TV remote to work for your speaker. So that walks you through a flow. Now, this video isn't sponsored by Sonos. I just happened to buy their sound system and have been using this app and thought I would do a review. But It seems like one of Sonos's competitive advantages is how much you can really control inside of the app, because it doesn't come with a remote control when you buy their newer soundbars. So having these options all available in the app, I think, is a huge win. It's easy to set up. It's easy to connect your devices together. The hardware options here, you can turn the status lights on, enable touch controls. That's great. Now, you'll notice that here there's this empty space. It looks like they used it as almost like a spacer. I don't think that's necessary. This seems like a quick fix they did just to get the learn more option in here. It doesn't follow the same design as the rest of the app. It would make sense to me if they just removed this empty space and then moved the learn more somewhere else. Then finally, under education, there's this option, which takes us through a guided tour. You can scroll through, see everything there is. It's nice, it's interactive. There's some good animations. Um, Overall, I think this is pretty clean. And then finally at the end, it offers to enable the voice control. That's it for the product. Here we can go to add a product, and this is going to scan any nearby devices that need to be set up. Now for About My System, I'm not going to walk through that because it shows some sensitive information, but basically it shows information about the app, such as the version and the build number, and then for each of the products that you have linked, it's going to show information for those, like their IP address, their name, what group they're in, etc. Let's look at the Airplay. I think that if I had any products that weren't compatible, this would be enabled, but right now I can't change it. If we learn more, it takes us out to uh, the browser. Then there's alarms. If we click into that, it shows which alarms you have set currently. I can go ahead and add an alarm, and it shows a lot of controls for it. I can change the time. This pop-up is interesting. It's the standard Android time picker, but it's not styled at all. You can change a lot of the look and appearance of this. I'm surprised that Sonos didn't style this more, considering they have such a unique design across the rest of the app. So it's a little different UX, and it kind of just reminds you that you're using just a standard Android component out of the box. There's nothing wrong with that. You can choose a time, you set which room this is going to happen in. You can choose the music. Now, this is pretty cool because you can look through different playlists. You can look at your YouTube music to pick a song, and really customize what the alarm is going to show. You can set when it repeats, and here it's going to say, each one you can enable separately. Then if we go back, it lists them out independently. If we have several in a group, it's going to show, Tuesday through Friday. I think that's a nice touch. The volume we can set here, the percent. Now this volume slider works a little differently than the system max volume we looked at before, because you can actually tap different spots and it'll seek right to it. You can also move this down to 0%. So I think that other slider should be able to do that as well. Under options, you can set the duration. Now, this you can set no limit, or you can actually put in specifically what duration you want. And again, this could be styled, but looks like they chose not to. Yeah, just some standard controls. If we save the alarm, it shows up here, and we can turn it on or off. That's a nice toggle to have. And if you click back into it, you can edit the alarm. So now if we look at the bottom, we can delete it. So there's a good confirmation. And there it is. That's all for alarms. For audio compression, the settings here let you choose between compressed or uncompressed, or you can just leave it as automatic. If you change between them, I do wish that it would show underneath here in the subtext what my selection was. It does that in other places. I think it could do that here too, and that would be nice. Just to see at a glance what it's set to. Under date and time, this is going to be just for the I think this is just controlling the app probably for the alarms and what it shows inside the app. Groups is disabled. When I click on it, it says the feature is only available for systems with 3 or more groups. I think that's an interesting design because I think there's a lot of people who probably have 2 groups and would benefit from the controls here. And again, they're using a toast, which I've mentioned I'm not a fan of. Under media servers, there's 2 options for controls for different servers. I think it's interesting that these weren't on by default. It seems like something that people would automatically want to see, but maybe there's a decision behind that. Going into the network, we can manage the networks that are available. I think that's great. You can update the networks on any of the devices. So if you have maybe multiple routers or Wi-Fi channels, you could come in here and switch between them. That's a nice thing to have. For parental controls, you've got a couple controls here and it shows which of your services allow you to filter content. So that's good. Here we can see the same thing before with the empty list item with these dividers. Again, I think this learn more button could have been moved out to its own section in this screen. Under the system name, we can change this. I think it's nice. It's mostly for personalization because it's not going to control anything. I don't think you can have multiple systems. And again, you can see I can clear it, and if I go back, unless I put in a custom name, it's just going to keep what was there before so that I don't accidentally delete it and not have a name. Under system updates, I can set this to update automatically. This wasn't turned on by default, and I wish it was because this seems like a great feature to have. You can choose when it gets scheduled. There's 4 options. One thing that would be nice is if this was a little more clear over what the time ranges were for this. For example, which option would I choose for 4 a.m.? It's not entirely clear. We're able to check for updates. This is taking us out of the app. The back button doesn't work, so we can click done. Learn more, that's going to take us out. And then finally, you can transfer your system ownership. I don't think that's something I want to do. Now we can take a look at services and voice. Under this section, it's going to give us a few options. We can click to add a voice assistant. I like that it has Alexa and Google Assistant. Sonos also has their own voice control. You can choose any of those. I like that you can add different services for the music. If you click in, you can see there's quite a lot of options here. It looks like they've covered everything in this list. There is an option to search, and when it pops down this filter, you can tap into it, but I wish that it would have automatically brought up the keyboard. It's a very standard practice, and it would have been nice to see here. You can search for any service, and it's going to filter down to that. Now, if you tap the search again, it gets rid of the filter input, but the filter itself is still being applied. So it would have been nice if there was a way to clear this out. It seems like they kind of added this after the fact and didn't put a lot of thought into it. Also, if I hit the back button, I would expect it to just clear out the filter and then put the screen back to its default, but it actually just takes me back. It's not the best experience, but it's not bad. I'm still happy that they have the option to add so many different services. Now looking at app preferences, there's a lot of options here for simple controls. I like that. There is an appearance item. I can set it between light and dark mode or use the system default. So one thing I want to point out is when you change the appearance, it kicks you out of the section you're in, and it also kind of messes up this music layout. You can see everything got cleared out of this. It still shows when I scroll up, but in this layout, it's gone. I wish that there was a way for that to be a little more seamless. Now I have to open the app again, and now it shows up correctly. If I go to my preferences and move back to dark mode, the same thing happens. So it looks like just a simple bug. Looking down in the app preferences, all of these options are simple toggles. I think it's good that they have these. They do have this installer setup, and what that does is when you click in, it's meant for installers who set up a lot of these sound systems. They have it in here, and if you enable it, it's not on by default, but if you enable it, it's going to give you some features where you can skip the setup pop-ups. It almost seems like a debug option or something that shouldn't really be user-facing for most people. What I would have liked to see here is maybe they could have hidden it in the app where you have to tap, somewhere on the screen several times. I've seen that before in an app where they kind of hide things unless you know where to look for them. And then down below, there's the app version and the build. Again, this was also duplicated from the About system, so maybe they could have removed it from one place or the other just to reduce duplication throughout the app. These two settings at the bottom, I really like. You can manage the Android settings, which will take you into the Android system settings for the app. I haven't seen many apps do that. I think it's nice to be able to just quickly go to the settings. And then finally, you can reset the app. Thankfully, this does have confirmation as well. Now let's look at the support. It looks like there's a few options here. These two, based on their icon, are going to take me out of the app to a link on Sonos's website. I've checked a lot of the links in the app, and it looks like they all work correctly. That's something that I look for. You'd be surprised how many links are outdated or don't go to a real web page. These three options at the bottom, you can submit the diagnostics. This is a great option to have if you're working with the support and need to troubleshoot. This can be a great way for them to see the same things you're seeing. These support options at the bottom, you can find your missing products and downgrade a product. When you click these, it just pops up a nice simple workflow for you to go and troubleshoot whatever your issue might be. Looking at the data privacy, it looks like they've got some standard controls here. For personalization services, you can tap that to turn it off if you don't want recent activity or the app to track what you're listening to. So it's nice that they have that. And I'm glad that they give a good detailed description of what all of that entails. You can also link out to usage data on their site or view the privacy policy. Those are standard options. If we look at the legal section, these are all just links that are going to go out to their website. I think that it makes sense. I'm glad that they include these so you don't have to go digging for them. Under inbox and offers, I think this list item could be simplified. It shows inbox and offers, but then the subtext is messages and special offers. Seems a little redundant because I think everybody knows that messages are going to be in an inbox, and I don't think there's enough difference between offers and special offers to need to call them out separately. When we click into it, it shows these two options for inbox and shop. I don't really see how shop is relevant here. And inbox, you have to click again into it to get to your inbox. What I would have liked to see is if the shop was pulled out into a different screen entirely, maybe just in the main settings list. Then when you click inbox and offers, it would just take you straight to your inbox, which is probably where you want to go. So when we click into the inbox, I don't have any messages. I'm assuming they would show up here in the list. The empty state does look good. Another thing I noticed here is that in the toolbar, they don't use that same back icon. They say done instead. I'm not sure why. I think they could have stayed consistent with the rest of the UI experience, but it still works and you can still use the back button. So I don't think it's a big deal. That's everything for the settings screen, so we're going to move on to the other sections. But first, I want to take a look at this music layout. I like that it transitions nicely when we tap on it. Other thing, if you look at these edges, they did a nice animation here where it starts out with a gap on the left and right, but as you scroll up, it actually takes over the full width and it becomes a full screen layout. I think that's a really nice, well done transition. I think for this layout, they have a lot of nice standard controls. It's showing the album art. It shows controls you can play. You can change the volume. I really like this control here for the volume, as it shows the it shows the icon changing, and you can go down to 0. Again, you can mute it here. I think that's a good choice. I think they probably could have shown it muted when you get down to 0, but that's fine. And then if we tap on this, it's going to pull up just a quick EQ changer, so you can do that on the fly. And if we tap on this gear, it's going to take us just to the product settings, so we can go in more detail there. Now, one thing that I don't like is that you can't clear this. You can't swipe it away, you can't dismiss it, and you can't get rid of what's playing. You know, sometimes I just like to clear out whatever's on there so that I don't accidentally hit play. The only way to do that is to tap up here and go to your queue and then hit clear. When you do this, it's going to get rid of whatever's playing. One thing that I don't like is that this 3-dot menu is different than what shows in the queue. When I come up here and go to the queue, the options it shows are a little bit different, and when I hit more, it changes to show sort of the same options. I don't know why they couldn't have just shown all of the options right away here like it did on this view. When I tap these 3 dots, it just shows kind of everything. I think they could make that a little more consistent between the different locations. One thing I want to point out here with this song progress, you can see that it gets cut off at the start and at the end, and we can see what's going on if we go back to the layout bounds, and we can come and look at this, and it's actually the padding is right up against it. If you look at this one for the volume, the bar, when you get it to the very end, it has just enough room inside of its layout to touch the very end, the thumb does. But when we look at the song progress, when it gets to the end, it actually hits that boundary and it cuts off. The thumb is still there, it's just being cut off by its layout. So that seems like a simple oversight. They could have easily made that work better. Now, it's not a big deal. These are just things that I notice, especially when the rest of the app is done so meticulously well and the experience is so well thought out. Things like this stand out a lot more. Looking at the queue, we can see that there's a few options. You can, it tells you how many songs are in the queue. You can shuffle, repeat, clear, edit, and save. If we edit, you can see you can remove individual items in the queue, and there's a spot here where you can click to rearrange items in your queue. Now, something I don't like about this is it's a little confusing. If I want to start a radio from this song, it doesn't actually add more songs into the queue. What it does is it just changes the active song that's playing. But if I go back to the queue, it still only shows the song I was using, and it says that the queue is not in use up at the top. It's really not clear why those aren't in sync. The way that it would work in other apps is if you were to start a radio from this song, it would fill up the queue maybe with other songs that are in that radio, or it would replace this one. But I don't think I've ever seen an app where they're completely different, what's playing versus what's in the queue. And you'll notice here, if I clear the queue, it doesn't clear what's actively playing. It still leaves that song. So now there's no way to get rid of what's playing here unless I start a new song and then clear that from the queue. But overall, I think it's really great that they added this. It's definitely the main focus point, whether I'm listening to music or watching something on the TV. I can see all of the controls right here, and it's a nice summary of what the content is. So now we're going to take a look at the other sections of the app. We have the search, and you'll notice here it shows our recent searches. I think that's nice to see. You can clear out individually the recent searches, or you can clear all of them. So we can go ahead and do that. I think that's good for just cleaning it up or getting rid of things that you don't want to see in there anymore. Now, there are different categories you can click through at the top here, and while I think that's great, I did notice sort of an issue with the UI. If you scroll over from one end to another and then try to tap this, it's going to reset the position of this scrolling UI and then animate that bar going across. You'll see it happen a few times there. Looking at the search now, if we tap in, you can see that we're able to type and see results. Something that I noticed with this search is that it has sort of a weird refresh. As you type, you can see the results disappear and say that there's no results until it loads up the search results. So I think what they could have probably done here is leave the current results until the new ones come in, and then you can just update what's currently there. I don't think it needs to clear it out and then reset the view. We can change between artists and songs, and it will keep the search for those different categories, so that is nice. Now, one thing to point out is it shows here which service I'm searching, and if I click into that, the results actually do stay. So you'll notice here, if I start searching for that same artist and I go under YouTube Music, now as I continue to search, they don't go away until the new list updates. So I think it would be great if they could do that same behavior when I'm not looking at one particular service. Looking into the artist details, if I click in here, I can see all of the different collections of songs. I can see albums, or I can shuffle the artist. I think that's a great just standard experience. If I click up here, I can add the artist to my home screen. I can also browse that artist. Clicking into an album, and I can see all of the songs labeled by their index. I can see options for each one. So I think they've got definitely a lot of the standard things you would look for in a music app. Another thing that I like is when you're searching, you can see which service returned those results. Looking at the songs, if I tap this, it's going to just start playing it right away. When I tap the three dots, I get a list of options, and I can tap more, but it isn't clear what is different about this. And if you tap done, it actually closes this whole section. What I don't like is that from the more menu, I have to use the system back to get back to the main options screen. I wish that there was an option maybe up here just to go back and close this more menu, or for them to just consolidate all of the options to when you first tap this. That way you don't have those two different states of this card. Overall, I would say the search screen has everything you're looking for. It works mostly as expected. It has all the controls that you would expect. Now we'll take a look at the system overview, or I guess this is the home screen. It's the option in the middle. There's not much to this screen. It just shows which groups you have listed. Here I only have one, and it also shows alarms at the top. So I guess it's just nice at a glance to see what you have going on. When we look at the browse menu, it has these different options for collections, and what this does is tapping on the favorites will actually add it to the My Sonos page, which is at the end. We'll take a look at that. And if we tap on the card, it'll just start playing that collection. So that's nice if you want to see what the category is before you add it to your favorites. So now we're looking at the My Sonos screen, and this is where it looks like your music dashboard is going to be for the most part. You can see all of these categories that you have saved. Now the inbox button is added up here at the top, and that just takes you directly to your inbox. I don't know that that's necessary because it's already in another place in the app. It seems like it's sort of unnecessary duplication. Maybe they could remove one or the other. Something I like is that you can edit the categories. If you tap up here, you can see which ones you have favorited, and if you long press them, you can move them around. Now, one thing I did notice is after moving them around, you can see a brief flicker. It seems like a UI bug. It's not a big deal. It happens really fast and it doesn't impact anything, but it definitely takes away from the experience. And another thing to look at is once that happens, it gets rid of the forward arrow that indicates you can click into it. If you see here, there's this arrow on the right. Once I rearrange this, that arrow disappears, but I can still tap in and I can see what is in that category. You can't remove the recently played section, but I think it's nice to have. I do like that this edit screen shows a description at the top that explains everything you can do. One thing I noticed, if I tap to remove, there's no confirmation, so you could maybe tap that on accident, and then go have to find it to re-add it. An experience that I think might be a little bit better would be when you're editing, there could be just a checkbox next to each of these, and then a delete button somewhere so that you can do it all in bulk. But then you would just have one confirmation for anything you want to change. So that's everything for today's review. There were only some minor UI things that I would suggest improving. I really like that on the surface it seems like a very simple app and it's easy to navigate, but that when you dig deeper, and especially into the settings, you get a lot of control. I haven't come across a situation where I wasn't able to accomplish something. I think they clearly had a good vision with their design, and the engineering team implemented everything on the product very well. Overall, the Sonos app is very well made, and if you have Sonos products, I would recommend checking it out. This concludes my review of the Sonos app. Thanks for watching.